Ooh. Hi, welcome everyone to our monthly Aquarian Organization of Astrologers meeting. I am in the process of admitting folks into the room, and so I'll just ask you to sit tight. Please mute yourself if you haven't done so already. And once our participants get a little settled, we can get this meeting started. Okay. Julia, can I task you with the responsibility of letting people in the room
You want
while
me
I
to
do intro?
Yeah, I can keep adding them as they show up.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. So we have a full house tonight, whatever that means in Zoom land. We're really excited to see all of you, existing AOA members, new faces, friends, new and old. So welcome again to our monthly meeting. We're the Aquarian Organization of Astrologers. We've been around since 1973, congregating local astrological enthusiasts of all levels on occupied Ka, Kickapoo, Oseti, and Osage land, also known as Kansas City. We meet every second Monday of the month, and our mission is to offer education, community, and professional support for astrology enthusiasts in our local community. So my name is Eileen Liu, and I'm closing out my role as president of the AOA with this final talk. And really excited to invite Oscar today to share this presentation with us. I do have a couple of side notes. Although I'm kicking us off, I will have my friend Jill. Jill, are you in the room?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Hi, Jill. I was hoping you'd get
Hi.
on the mic. So Jill will close us out. Um, thank you so much for introducing yourself.
Hi, Jill. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, Oscar. Oscar?
Yeah, that's great.
Wonderful. And we'll do just really quick announcements before we kick off the presentation. So Julia, do you want to take that on real quick?
Sure. And this goes to, I'll be fast. This goes to our local members. This is board elections are in February. We'll be meeting in person at the church. And so the slate of elections will go out, electors will go out in the email. Basically, board members are staying pretty much the same. We're losing Eileen. She's moving to San Diego, so she's gonna be a remote member, but she's leaving us as president. So I'll do the new board members out in email. I think we have to have a board meeting and make sure we're in consensus on those. And then we'll vote on those at the February meeting, and then March 1, they'll take office for the new fiscal year. We always encourage anybody who's interested in participating on the leadership team to join us. We always love to have the fresh energy and the creativity to keep, the organization's been around a long time. We keep going with our participation from our community. So if anybody would like to take a little more of a leadership role, we'd be very interested in inviting you to join us. And I think that's it. Is there anything else that we need to housekeeping?
Not that I can think of,
I
Jill.
think that's it. So I'm going to turn it back over to you. Look for an email for the slate of new board members, and we'll vote in February. So see you then.
Thank you, Julia. All right, so it is now my great honor and privilege to introduce all of you to Óscar Moisés Díaz, who is many things, including poet, artist, film curator, translator, and last but not least, astrologer. And I am just really inspired by all of this my past activity we're hearing about. So I first met Oscar in the Association of Young Astrologers Discord, and soon grew to appreciate their beautiful practice, which pulls from Hellenistic, medieval, and Islamicate style astrology. So in the past few years, they've shared many great insights on topics such as fixed stars, time lords, plus plenty of juicy excerpts from film and literature. So tonight we get a chance to hear what they have to share on the lots of love in traditional astrology, particularly those that relate to pleasure, harmony, and relationships. Here's to you, Oscar.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Oh my God. Also thank you for I see 40 people are here. It's just really great that you would spend your evening with me. So thank you so much. I'm gonna share this slideshow or this sort of
Oh, I'm so sorry to interrupt
yeah.
you. Before you continue, I forgot to say to everyone in the audience, please hold your questions to the end. Feel free to comment and interact and comment on the slides in the comment box. Oh my gosh, in the chat box. But we're going to save questions all the way towards the end of the presentation. Okay.
Cool. Thank you. So yeah, the title of today's talk is Lots of Love. And I really like this art piece by Brancusi, who's a sculptor, and it's called The Kiss. So I thought it would be kind of a nice first image. So yeah, what is a lot? What are the lots? The lots are calculated points in a horoscope that are generated by combining two figures and then casting from a third figure. So that sounds really abstract, and we'll get into it. The third figure most often being the ascendant. Abu Mashar in the great introduction says, we cast from the ascendant because it is the indicator of beginnings and bodies. The first two figures often have, well, they do have a relationship to the topic of the lot. The lots originate in Hellenistic astrology, but were expanded dramatically in the Islamicate period, where they became one of the most integral tools of prognostication. So the lots have many uses. They're used in four ways: for delineating motives, nature, and hidden components to a chart. And they also serve as the final arbiter or the final say in a topic, and also to generate new ascendants. And they're also part of timing techniques. So they're very versatile. They have many layers. And hopefully today we can kind of get into some of the beginnings of that, but also kind of get into some of the more advanced techniques too. Why do we need lots? Abu Mashar gives an example of saying that both the sun and Saturn can represent the father in a chart. So which one is it? So the lots kind of will remove doubt because they sort of have the final say. I love the lots because they sort of give us definitive, concrete information. So tracing, kind of the history of the lots back, thinking about Hellenistic times, claromancy, which is divination by lots, is kind of the idea that it's a way to divine the will of deities by using methods that involve elements of chance. So this is rolling dice or throwing sticks or tossing stones. In Islam, we have the concept of qadr, that states that that God has already decided everything that will happen on earth and in people's lives. So for example, medieval Muslim astrologers would come to associate that sort of theological concept with the lots, especially the lot of fortune. So thinking about the lots, what's allotted to you, it's kind of this is sort of what chance and fate has sort of given you to deal with. There's also this concept from Islam of kisma, right? What is fated or allotted. And you could also think about lots as sort of a lottery that one enters. It's kind of what do you get at the roll of the dice, and what does that say about certain situations in your life? right? So yeah. How do we calculate lots? Like I said, like lots are calculated points that, are kind of generated by combining two figures and casting from a third. So what does that mean, right? Like I keep saying that, but so that means we're kind of like doing math. It involves formulas. And um, here on this slide, I sort of have like the three lots that I'm going to introduce today, just to kind of name them. So we're going to be talking about the lot of harmony, the lot of union and bonds, and the lot of erotic desires. A lot of times in the sort of transmission of astrology, up until really recently, we've been recovering the tradition. A lot of these lots get sort of mixed up or sort of squished together, or there's like a loss of context. So someone's like, okay, like we know that like, Valens has like a lot of marriage, but then there's like Abu Mashar using this lot. And then so it's sort of like, kind of been the work of historians recently to kind of like detangle that by looking at like like real sort of practice horoscopes and sort of like getting down to the nitty-gritty, and it actually becomes like, well, which of these three do you use to sort of speak to someone's like love life? And the truth is like each one of these individually has its sort of own purpose. So the lot of harmony, there's this quote from Dr. Olomi, who's a historian of astrology. He writes, the lot of harmony, this is not strictly about romantic love, but anything that brings joy, comfort, or love into someone's life. This is the stuff that brings people to life, their joys, their comforts, passions, and delights. So the lot of harmony is a lot of the times like a lot that's been historically used by astrologers to sort of um, point out and speak to what kind of things are fulfilling for a person. Like, what are their hobbies? What are sort of those things that like enliven them? The lot of union and bonds. Sometimes this is called the lot of marriage in Hellenistic texts. But it can be used for like love bonds in general, not just for like the institution of marriage. Sometimes this lot is gendered, where they'll say like, oh, for men go from Saturn to Venus and reverse for women. But actually in practice, we see like most astrologers by the 10th century are kind of basing this less in a gendered way and more so about sect. So like if you're born in the day, you would take it from Saturn to Venus. If you were born at night, you would reverse it and go to Venus to Saturn. And I'll illustrate all this in like a second. Uh, so yeah, um, the lot of erotic desires. This one's taking from the lot of spirit to Venus and cast from the ascendant and reverse for night charts. This is a lot that's often called Eros. Um, and that's kind of funny because the lot of harmony is also called Eros. So this is sort of like where things get mixed up. And so so we know like the lot of harmony is Eros by Valens, and then the lot of Eros down here, this third one is by Paulus. And so, Abu Mashar calls the lot of Eros by Valens the lot of harmony. And so then that's the one we would use for like hobbies and things. And then the lot of erotic desires, which is Paulus's calculation, that's the one we would use to speak to someone's like erotic desires and passions. So this is sort of, I don't know, a slide kind of differentiating and sort of introducing the lots we'll be working with today. So I think lots are very visual. And so this is the part where we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of how to calculate. So again, we're working with these formulas and we're taking the distance between different points in the chart and trying to sort of figure out where they land once we toss them from the ascendant, so it's like the way you would toss dice and see where they land. We're kind of doing that with like the distance between 2 points. So for example, this is like the lot of union and bonds, and so this is a day chart, right? The sun's above the horizon. This person's born in the day, so the calculation is Saturn to Venus cast from the ascendant. So you're going from point A to point B and figuring out what that is, and then kind of casting it from the ascendant. So, Saturn here is at 1723 of Cancer. and then Venus is at 2809. So, but the space between these two planets, if we start with from Saturn to Venus, is only around 11 degrees. So, like, what would we do then? We would take those 11 degrees and sort of cast them out from the ascendant. So the ascendant's at 28 degrees or so of like Cancer. So like, from 28, from, every house is 30 degrees, 30 minus 2, right? 30 minus 28, that's like 2. And then we have 9 degrees left over, right? And so that pushes the lot into 9 degrees of Leo. So that's kind of like, hopefully having this visual makes it make a lot of sense. And so we would say like, oh yeah, this is where the lot lands for this person at 9 degrees of Leo when we do that sort of calculation. This is sort of a hypothetical. If the person was born at night, we would switch, right? The calculation. So it's still the lot of union, but because the person hypothetically is born at night in this example, we, instead of Saturn and Venus, we would go Venus to Saturn and then cast from the ascendant. So we always go in zodiacal order, right? So like we're kind of like counting up, like every house is 30 degrees. And yeah, we kind of have to go all the way around the wheel this time to sort of land here where Saturn is. And so, then we sort of have to take the amount of degrees that sort of we counted and then toss them from the ascendant, which is like this pink line here. And we end up landing at around like 1807 degrees of Cancer. So in this example, the lot of union falls at 18 degrees of Cancer when we do this calculation this way. Now, this could be a little confusing perhaps, but we have technology. So if you go to AstroSeek, you can find the great Arabic lot calculator and you could just plug it in. So, if you have if up here we have like, the trigger, the significator, personal point. So the trigger will always be like point A and the significator is point B. So for the lot of union, right? Like we would go in a date chart, right? It's Saturn. We would put the here from, and then we're going to Venus, right? To Venus, and then we're tossing it from the ascendant. And then, the generator will sort of tell us where that lot lands. So there is sort of like a really easy way to do it through astroseek.com and the lot calculator. It's really useful. It saves a lot of time. But yeah, hopefully, having the visual too in the sort of last two slides makes you sort of understand, right? Like how we're kind of spinning and calculating distances. Let's see. So what do we do when we sort of like know where the lot is? There's sort of like these steps to sort of interpretation. So we're told to sort of interpret the lot after we calculate it by first examining the sign that it falls in. Second, the Lord ruling the sign, aspects to the lot, aspects to the Lord of the sign, and lastly, the house that it occupies. So yeah, this is like a sign-based technique, and the house is always sort of the last consideration. I also like to bring in the Bound Lord and sometimes even the Dodecatomoria, as both can also just like give more information. So let's sort of start seeing this in practice. So we're going to talk about Angelina Jolie. And if you notice, this is actually Angie's chart. She's born in the day. So let's actually start with like, the lot of union, right? So we went from Saturn to Venus, 11 degrees. We cast that out from the ascendant, landed at 9. So her lot of union's at 9 degrees. And so let's sort of see that and start talking about Jolie. So the lot of union and bonds in Jolie's chart is at 9 degrees of Leo. So it's a lot. So what do we know right away? Like it's ruled by the sun. that sun in Gemini in the 12th. The lot's also in the terms of Venus. So maybe some stuff we can start to say is like, you know, that Jolie tends to end up in relationships with people who maybe are solar charismatic types who perhaps are artists or entertainers, right? That Venusian element. The Lord is also in the terms of Venus, right? The sun's in the terms of Venus, the lot's in the terms of Venus. So that sort of will give you more the sun and charisma. Um, then we have Mars making a really close aspect, right? It's at 10 degrees of Aries, trining the lot, which is at 9 degrees. And so, that maybe speaks to sort of like a lot of the relationships she's been in have been like very like controversial and very public. It's like a Mars that's out of sect in the 10th house, very visible. So, that's adding sort of a bit of notoriety, perhaps to her relationships. Um, it's also something that maybe denotes affairs, right? Like in traditional texts, like Mars is known as the oath breaker, whereas Jupiter is the oath maker. So like sometimes like, like affairs or cheating ends up being like a martial signification, right? You can read that in Abu Mashar's like meanings of the planets. And so that's kind of interesting, right? Like this Mars is aspecting the lot pretty closely, and also its ruler, the sun, right? So we'll get to that in a minute. And so, yeah, kind of something that's really interesting is like kind of looking at who she's dated, like um, I want to bring up like two of her exes. One is like Billy Bob Thornton, who is like an actor, is also a musician, right? So then we get these like solar things, acting, musician through the Venus stuff. So I'm like, okay. And then she's also dated Jenny Shimizu, who's a model. So like very public figure. Uh Now what's interesting about how the lot of unions is sort of showing her relationships is that um a lot of like, when she started dating Jenny, she was like already dating somebody else. And so it was an affair. And then Billy Bob Thornton was like infamously already in like, with Laura Dern. And so like Angelina and Billy Bob got married and they eloped in Vegas. And there's like this interview where like Laura Dern's like, oh, I had no idea they did that. So he just never spoke to me again. And so it's interesting that like, if we're thinking about the lots as like things that are faded and sort of the concrete circumstances around a topic, it's like, wow, like the Mars is making the closest aspect to the lot, and also a really close aspect to the ruler, right? So like this thing about like controversy or sort of affairs, also like the ruler of the lot is in the 12th house. So she, Jolie's also spoken about like, yeah, like having to, date someone and then falling in love with someone else at the same time and having to keep it hidden in some sort of way. So like the 12th will also be like this place of like hidden affairs or things that happen in secret. And so like this has been kind of like a pattern throughout her life. And then like, we won't, I guess Brad is the most famous instance of this, but like I point out like Billy Bob and Jenny because like that's also like been the things that have surrounded her romances with them, with these people. Yeah, and so there's something really cool where the lot can also be used in some special techniques. So we're told by Dr. Olomi to check the sign of the lot of harmony or the lot of union. And if we find someone else, like a person who has Venus in that sign or in its dodecatemoria, they are considered highly compatible with us and will inflame our soul. And so, yeah, Jolie has like the lot of harmony in Scorpio and has the lot of union in Leo. if we look at like the birth charts of Jenny and Billy Bob, both of them have Venus and Leo. Jenny has Venus and Leo at like 10 degrees. So Jenny's Venus is literally on top of uh, Jolie's Lot of Union. And then Billy Bob's is like also in Leo. So yeah, that's kind of interesting because like these are really deep loves for her. And she even wrote something of like, she was like ready to marry Jenny, like these were like uh not sort of casual relationships for her, but like really deep ones. And maybe that speaks to the Lot of Union being in Leo and sort of a fixed sign. But yeah, it's kind of interesting that this kind of very special rule of like if someone has their Venus in the sign of your Lot of Union, they're probably like someone that you have this like unexplainable intense attraction to. And it's cool to see that kind of play out in multiple instances of her life. um yeah. um what else? The Lot of Harmony. So the Lot of Harmony for Jolie falls at 29 degrees of Scorpio. um And what I love about this is that, again, like the Lot of Harmony is supposed to show us like, hobbies and like things that the person finds fulfilling. Um, and Angelina, like what would a Lot of Harmony ruled by a Mars sort of like perhaps say? Like Mars is things that are hot and sharp, like um Angelina Jolie started from a very early age learning knife exhibition skills. So she knows like bladesmithing and like how to do like tricks with knives. Like one time she was on Conan and like she did a bunch of knife tricks with a Filipino butterfly knife. And everybody was like, how do you know that? And then she went into this whole thing about how she's not only had to like familiarize herself with like weapons on the sets of movies. I mean, most of her most famous movies are her like kicking ass, like the Tomb Raider or like Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Like she knows her way around um weapons, right? And she says that this like this fascination with weapons started when she was a child, and like it was something that her mother got her into, and she got her first set of daggers when she was 11 years old. So Angelina Jolie is like known for collecting daggers and knives. um so yeah, it's like wow, a Lot of Harmony in a Mars sign ruled by Mars um is bringing in sort of this interest with like collecting knives. Now, if you look here, like the Lot of Harmony is also in the terms of Saturn. So that adds a little more information. She's particularly known for her knife collection, containing mostly things from the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Um, and she says that her mother, the way her mother introduced her to knives were by going to Renaissance fairs. So like Saturn being like associated with old things or historical things, it's right there. It's like not only knife collecting, but it's like collecting old knives. um Angelina Jolie's quoted in an interview where she says, quote, "It reminds you of history, and there's just something beautiful about them and traditional. Each country has different knives and weapons, and that's why I started collecting them. I've done this since I was a little girl." Um, and I find that familial connection really interesting too, right? Because um, this is a lot ruled by Mars. Mars is conjunct the Lot of the Mother, right? The Lot of the Mother for her is at 1348 of Aries. So it's like 3 degrees away from that. So like this isn't something that she finds on her own, but it's actually something that she finds through her mother, right? And so like because any planet that is close to a lot bodily will become a co-lord. So her mom is sort of represented by Mars and Aries in her chart. Um, but it's also, Mars is also ruling the other lot of her hobbies. So finding the hobby of weapon collecting through her mom. So more layers to this. interestingly enough, when Angelina Jolie is 11, when she starts her knife collecting, um, this is a year where her lot of fortune perfected to Aries. Um, Abu Mashar tells us we must perfect from at least 4 points, right? The midheaven, the lot of fortune, the ascendant, and the luminary of sect. And so if we perfect from the lot of fortune to tell us big events that will happen to the person, that year her lot of fortune landed in Aries. And so it turns on, Mars. So meaning it turns on all the lots that Mars rules over, right? The lot of the mother, but also the lot of harmony, bringing those things together. So that's sort of a timing technique through perfections. And I think that's important to point out because, yeah, lots can be turned and also activated when, their time lords are sort of activated. Going a little bit further in the timeline in 2008, when she's 33, we reach again, like, perfecting from the ascendant at age 33. That's a 10th house year, right? So like Aries is activated. So Mars again. What happens in 2008? She takes her son Maddox to buy his first knives and shares her hobby with him. Now this was like majorly controversial, like tabloids like ate this up, like it was very sort of like a big scandal, I guess, and maybe that speaks to, Jolie being a day chart with like this Mars still out of sect, like bringing sort of this notoriety or sort of negative attention for these things. And yeah, people got mad that she was like buying her son knives. But she said that like, yeah, her son like looked at her collection and was super interested and that she would use, this like knife collecting as sort of a way to talk to Maddox about violence, but also history. And that they really bonded over that. And so um I think that's funny because a lot of harmony, is in the fifth house of children, right? And so not only is like, the ruler of the lot uh conjunct the mother and also like conjunct the moon, which you could say is family as well, but like this knife collecting thing is like a family affair. It's something that her mom passed down, but then she gets to pass down because the lot of harmony is in that fifth house. So it's like bringing the children in to the fold. And when does that happen again? That happens when Mars is the Time Lord from the Ascendant at 33. She takes Maddox shopping. And these are recreational activities, right? Like the fifth house and recreation and hobbies. Um, so I thought that was like right on time and like really kind of fun. Um, and so yeah, Angelina and her hobbies do the lot of harmony. Um, let's see. And I guess the last lot is the lot of Eros, right? Like or erotic desires. So this lands for her at 27 degrees of Taurus. So it's in the terms of Mars and it's ruled by Venus. Um, yeah, this is sort of like where we're gonna get into like uh kinks. So like yeah, but why do I say that? So like the lot of arrows, right, is supposed to show us about like sexual desires and like it's explicitly about sex. And Angelina's always been like super public about her sex life and like uh again, it's like the term lord is so huge for anything, it's sort of like going to show up as like a major player. So it's in the terms of Mars. So again, like we're here with like martial things entering the bedroom. She's quoted as saying that she when she was a teen, she had like a boyfriend and like um they had this like moment where like they came at each other with knives, but it was like in an erotic context and that like she felt like this thrill. And so like I guess that would be, knife play or like blood play. Um she also spoke about a girlfriend, like a lover, a girlfriend. She's bisexual, right? Um and she has this quote where she says, I got the knives out and had a night where we attacked each other. It felt so primitive and it felt so honest. And then I had to deal with, not telling my mother or hiding things, wearing gauze bandages to high school. And so, yeah, like there's this like sort of that's what, like in the chart through the lot, right? And like the lots are very specific, and the lots will sort of show like, again, like motivations, hidden desires. And yeah, I don't want to like pathologize Jolie in any way, but like it's kind of amazing that like those significations are there, because like the bound lord of this lot of Eros is Mars, right? Even if it's a verse, um it's still like coming through really strongly. um she's also been quoted, talking about how S&M had changed her life, quote, spiritually. And that's sort of why I have like the Dodecatemoria of Pisces written up here. Because again, like it's another layer. Astrology is all about layers. It's like an onion, and it's like a really good astrologer sort of be able to synthesize and look at all of these multiple layers, right? It's not just like, what's the ruler, but it's like, okay, what are these other layers? So the Dodecatemoria being like this very like exact final layer. It's like in Pisces, which is her ninth house. So like, there's also stuff about like her erotic life that is tied to spirituality, and maybe like working through through sexuality as a way to like come to world beliefs or philosophies or spiritual connections. And it's kind of cool that she has a quote where she kind of says that. So yeah. What else? There's also like that famous thing with Billy Bob Thornton where like they would wear like each other's blood in like vials on the red carpet, like Mars and blood. Like, it's like a lot ruled by Venus, sure, but it's also like got these like Mars layers. So it's like, oh, this is like the Jolie blood vial thing. Like this is where that comes from. Um Also like thinking about the ruler, right? We haven't talked about Venus yet. Like this Venus in Cancer, it's in the terms of Saturn, and it's conjunct Saturn, or like very co-present. So like thinking about Saturn as like a planet of transgression, right? Like Saturn and sort of going to the limits, or sort of going towards the things that are hidden or taboo. Like these are things that like, yeah, like she started exploring as a teen and were kept private, right? And so, if we think about like Venus as like maybe love or like romance being the stages for these things to be explored, but again, it's like that Saturn stuff is like about like the privacy perhaps, or sort of like the hidden nature of these things. There's a lot to say there. The secrecy. So the amount of trust, right? Like uh stuff like that would take. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of like how to kind of approach, sort of like looking at these lots, and kind of like putting these pieces together of like, where's the ruler, who's aspecting the lot, who's aspecting the Lord, what house is it in, like, um, yeah. I hope those examples were exciting and juicy. We're gonna talk about um Nicole Kidman next. Um, and okay, that's the deck tomorrow. Um, yeah. See. So with the second example, I'm probably going to add even more sort of layers on top of it. So if you feel lost, that's okay. I, it's just, I like to sort of like, do the basics, but also kind of show you what this looks like at more advanced levels too. So yeah, here we kind of see uh, Nicole Kidman's Lot of Harmony, right, which has to do with hobbies at 654 of Sagittarius. Her Lot of Unions at like 9 degrees of Pisces. Her Lot of Eros or erotic desires is at 29 degrees of Capricorn. So yeah, like I picked two actresses that I like really love. and admire. And like one thing that I've always known about Nicole Kidman is that like she loves horses. She's like a really serious like horse lover, animal lover in general. And I was like, can we find that through the lot of harmony? Like, will this show up in a certain way? And and it kind of really does. So like the lot of harmony is in Jupiter's term. It's also like uh, ruled by this Jupiter in Leo in the 10th house. It's very angular, very prominent, very strong. Jupiter's in its own term. So like, it's got a lot of strength to it. It's the benefic of Sact. Um, but like what about that necessarily says like animals or like horses? In medieval astrology, we have something called triplicity lords through the houses. And you can kind of see them written here where like each house I've written like 3 planets and those are like triplicity lords. So like the idea is that each house has subtopics. And so like we could say here the 12th house is in Libra, but the third topic, the third triplicity lord is Jupiter. So like Jupiter has rulership over whatever that third folder is. Or, like the ruler of the 12th is Venus, but the ruler of the second triplicity lord or the second subtopic of the 12th is Mercury, you know? And so yeah, there's this like so once you kind of are able to see those layers in the chart, it's not just about what houses Jupiter rules, like right, this Jupiter is ruling Sagittarius, the second house, it's ruling that lot, but it's also ruling the 5th house. So, you know, but it's also ruling the third topic in the 8th. It's also ruling the third topic of the 12th. It's ruling the third topic of the 4th. So yeah, this is sort of like a great way to make your delineations like threefold or three-pronged. And triplicity lords are great because they're also like adding specificity, like the 12th house is many things, but like the third triplicity lord is like large writing animals and beasts of burden, whereas like the first, whereas like hidden enemies is like one of the other ones. So it helps you differentiate who's being represented by what, and so yeah, let's talk a little bit more about these triplicity lords. So before I sort of like go back to the lot of harmony. So I've been translating Arijal, and what I love about Arijal is that he gives us really cool triplicity lord delineations. And so he says, if the third triplicity lord of this house, the third, was fortunate, dominant, and received, it means that the born one would ride beasts and have them and make use of them and would gain from them and obtain benefit from them. And if he were in a different state than this, the one born would walk around following beasts or tame other beasts and think about them. So this is what Alvarejal says about like the condition of the third triplicity lord of the 6th house. And so yeah, the 6th house is often associated with like animals or pets in contemporary times, but it's also just like animals, so she has Saturn in the 6th. So it's in the place there, but it's also the third triplicity lord of the 6th. And so she's kind of quoted saying that she's always had this fascination with animals, and like if she wasn't an actress, that she would probably work at a zoo. So like that's kind of like, kind of a place to see already this kind of interest with animals through the third triplord of the 6th. Then there's also the third triplord of the 12th, that Jupiter, right? Which Al Andazagar tells us the first triplicity lord of the place of enemies, meaning the 12th house, indicates enemies. The second, fortune, and the third indicates writing and domestic animals. So there's animal sort of topics within the 12th and the 6th. And it seems like large animals, right, are the 12th, right? And the 6th are more sort of like maybe chickens or pets, right? Like, but those connotations are there. And so for kind of speaking about Nicole Kidman's chart specifically, like Saturn will sort of rule, kind of like the topic of pets or small animals in her life, being the third trip lord of the six. And then Jupiter will rule her relationship to large animals, by being the third triplicity lord of the 12. And so if we know that lots are governed by planets, yeah, we kind of need to have a very sort of holistic understanding of all the things that Jupiter governs or is in charge of for her. So not only the second and the fifth, right? Because they're like the houses of Jupiter, Sag, and Pisces, but also, again, like what I said earlier, it's also in charge of the third topic of the 12, writing animals and huge beasts of burden, right? So um, it was kind of obvious to me right away when I opened her chart and I saw that a lot of harmony in Sagittarius and Jupiter's term ruled by this Jupiter being trined really nicely, by it's like a very tight trine. And I'm like, oh, the topic of large animals, horse riding, that's where that is. Other things because you want to sort of find also testimony through many techniques, like she's also a Scorpio rising, and that this ascendant in the terms of Mars. There's a delineation from Valence, for example, that says that like the ascendant in the terms of Mars like is like people who tame beasts. And even though Mars is a verse and sort of behind her in the 12, like Mars is sort of in the terms of Jupiter. So it's like, we kind of get that like beast taming thing, but in a 12th house context. And I always tell people who have their ascendant ruler in the 12th that like, so you kind of have to go to the 12th. So the 12th being isolated places, like, kind of places that are in nature or sort of, yeah, very, isolated from like daily rhythms of, I'm like, oh wow, like this is literally Nicole Kidman's ranch, which is like in rural Australia, very far away from like any town, or she probably doesn't have like neighbors even. Like it's like more than 100 acres, and it's like when she willingly like leaves Nashville or like a city, her city life in Nashville, Keith Urban, like she's going to this very isolated rural place in Australia to tend to her animals in her farm, and so she kind of has to go to the 12th to sort of get into her chart ruler. And wow, it's a Mars that's in the terms of Jupiter. So Mars is trying to funnel its activities through this Jupiter funnel. And Jupiter happens to be in charge of the third topic of the 12th. Again, like riding horses, large animals, right? And so yeah, that's also something that like speaks to her relationship with animals. And she's hardcore, like she knows how to rear cattle. She knows how to like work and tame animals. It's not that she just kind of is rich and owns them. Like she finds like deep fulfillment and sort of like working with them, like training them. She does all her own stunts on movies um when they involve horses. So yeah, uh, I thought her a lot of harmony, kind of through the triplicity lords of the 12th, like really sort of illustrate this like, you know, equestrian horse girl life. Um, what else? I haven't even been looking at my notes. I've just been kind of riffing. Let's see. Uh, yeah. Uh, Right, like talking more about the lot, like, it receives a trine to this like Saturn and Aries, like it receives a trine from its lord too. The lord receives that trine from Saturn. So again, that's like, bringing the topic, the third trip lord of the six being like smaller animals, that's influencing the lord of the lot, also the lot itself. So there's like further testimony there. There's also like aspects from Mars in a whole sign way to like the lot and also the ruler of the lot, right? She says she fell in love with working with horses even more deeply when she was on the set of the film Australia, which is like an epic she filmed um in like a very isolated location. Again, it's like it like took place in like the middle of nowhere in Australia. So again, like these elements of like, you know, the 12th. And this was like shot in 2007 while she was 40 years old. And so if we like perfect from the ascendant um for that 40th year of life, we would have landed in the fifth house technically, right? And it would have activated uh Jupiter. So again, like what happens when Jupiter is activated as a time lord? It's gonna activate maybe perhaps like the houses, but also everything it rules. So it's gonna activate the second, the fifth, but it's also gonna activate like the third trip lord of the 12th, and also the third trip lord of the fourth, and so on and so on. So um even that is interesting, is that like the year where she really gets into like this horse stuff is like the year where like the perfection from the ascendant activates Jupiter, which is the ruler of this lot, right? So I think that's really huge. And she says that from that experience is what made her buy the cattle ranch later on, that it was just so overwhelmingly cool for her. um so yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the lot of union. So again, this lot of union is in Pisces. It's in the fifth house. It's governed by that Jupiter too. It's in the terms of Venus. So what could we maybe say about like the people that she maybe ends up in partnerships with? I mean, her famous husband is like Keith Urban. And I always think about like, yeah, you know, like Pisces brings in that sort of connection with like poets, composers of verse, you know, like artistic types. Um, that's a very sort of medieval way of looking at Pisces as like the poet. Um, and the lots in the fifth house of entertainers. Keith Urban's a musician, right? Um, Keith is also like really known. Like if you don't like listen to country music, like you might not know who Keith Urban is, but like he's also just famous in like the general sort of public imagination, I think, because he's like been a judge. So like, right, it's a lot of union governed by Jupiter. And who are Jupiter people? Jupiter people are like priests, judges, um counselors, advisors, teachers. And Keith Urban is sort of a famous teacher on TV. Like he's a teacher and a mentor and a judge on both The Voice and American Idol. So like, you know, that's kind of describing her husband. um you know uh there's also like an aspect from the moon in Sag to the lot. You know, he's also infamously always is touring from the years of 2024 to 2022. He only didn't tour the world musically 3 years in that time frame. So like the moon and its signification with like travelers, it's like that's adding a little bit to the lot of union description of like who her lovers might be, right? Like he's a traveling musician. The moon brings that mobility of that, you know. um Also like the Jupiter, the lord of the lot, is like kind of conjunct and co-present that Venus. So like again, like that's the art stuff, but it's a Venus that's out of sect. And sometimes when a Venus is out of sect, like kind of can bring like um sort of excess, you know. And so like Keith Urban has like spoken about how like um he's had like substance abuse issues. And he said that like uh when he was dating Nicole, he was so ashamed because that stuff really came to the fore. But she called an intervention for him, and he said he speaks about how thankful he is to his wife because he stopped. uh he was finally able to like, you know, get sober through his relationship with her. And I think that's like a really cool like um sort of thing about, yeah, this lot of union and their you know, signifying their relationship. It's like, oh, that Venus that maybe is out of sect in a tough bound, but it's like, you know, through like the oath, which is Jupiter, the relationship, that like they work it out, you know. I thought that was really cool. um yeah. uh Also you know, there's like a special there's that special rule that I spoke about where um if someone has a Venus in the sign of your lot of union or in its dodecatemoria, then that person will inflame the soul. Well, we don't have Keith Urban's birth time, but Venus can only move a couple of degrees a day. So Keith Urban has his Venus in Virgo anywhere from 15 to 17.5 degrees. So that lands in the dodecatemoria of Pisces. So he has a Venus in Virgo and it's dodecatemoria is Pisces. And then Nicole's lot of unions in Pisces. So again, like that is like a synastry rule for someone who like inflames your soul. And so like, yeah, they've been madly in love for years. Like this is it for her, you know. I don't know how many like Nicole Kidman like hardcore fans are here, but if you've ever seen her on Jimmy Fallon, there's like this whole running gag about her and Jimmy Fallon like having I guess like a misconnection, like, you know, and it's funny because you should look that up, you should YouTube it, just like Jimmy Fallon, Nicole Kidman, and there's like 2 videos of that, and it's like this thing where like they're like, "Ooh, what if we did date?" You know, and like, uh, what's funny is that Jimmy also has like a Venus in Virgo, but it doesn't. It lands like right before the dodecatemoria of Pisces. It lands in the dodecatemoria of Aquarius. So I mean, astrologically, if Nicole came to me and she was like, "Do I choose Jimmy or Keith?" I'd be like, "Oh, Keith." um, Jimmy's Venus didn't quite make it. um, so yeah, a little joke there. But yeah, it kind of shows like how cool that synastry rule is. Is like take it. Yeah, when you're on the apps or talking to people or asking, you know, your dates for their birth charts, you know, see if your Venus is in the sign of their lot of union or in the dodecatemoria of it, because like that might be the one, or vice versa, you know. Um, it's so cool to see that play out in charts. Um, she marries Keith 5 days after her 39th birthday on June 25th of 2006. 2006. This is the year that Jupiter quickens her soul through a technique called the custodians of the soul, which I won't get into here. It's kind of like an advanced solar return technique, but basically what that means is that Jupiter quickening the soul is Jupiter trying to give her a moment of clarity or inspiration about the things that Jupiter rules in her life. So again, like Jupiter's conjunct Venus, Jupiter rules a lot of union, rules the fifth, the second. So it's like she would have been having all these revelations around like the things that Jupiter is in charge of, which also includes like the third triplet of the 12, the third triplet of the fourth, right? Jupiter has his hands in all of that as an administrator. But that's one of the things that sort of says like, oh, okay, like this custodian of the soul technique sort of speaks to the inner life, and like it's sort of the things that will become really urgent for a person. So I was like, oh yeah, she got married like literally a couple of days after Jupiter starting to quicken that soul. And so yeah, there's this like emphasis on the 10th of public status, the fifth of love, and the lot of union, and the second house of money, right? um uh Jupiter is also a Time Lord if we perfect from the moon in the year 2020, 2006. And so like it's also like, yeah, a Time Lord through a luminary. And then Jupiter is also uh if we yeah, and that's, I have to be very, very specific about that because the moon perfects to Pisces. And there's this rule, this timing technique that Abu Mashar gives us with the lot of union, where he says the following. He says, when Jupiter arrives to this lot or looks at it with power, he shall be joined in union. Or when the lord of this lot or the sun or the moon arrives at its place, then he shall be joined to a familiar or one related. So looks is like a reference to transits, and then arrival means perfection. So, I mean, there's many qualifications for this, but again, because her moon, the year that she got married, perfected to Pisces, right? That's one of them. So it meets that sort of qualification, and what's that end up being? A marriage. So that's like one way you could see, you know, perfections kind of playing into sort of, you know, play with this lot of union in Pisces, right? Like the moon had reached there, so it's like time for a union. Um, what else? There's other things that said that too, like another thing is like if we perfected from the ascendant, we would have landed in Virgo. Or actually, wait, let's see. No, if we perfected from the destined light, the sun, we would have landed in Virgo. And so like that makes Mercury a time lord. And so like why is Mercury important for this, right? There's also like this advanced technique called the periods of felicity. And the rule for that is to look at the Fidaria tables. And so like right, like she was like in this Fidaria period, closing out her moon period, her moon Mercury period, right? Like around the time that she got married. And like there's this rule where like you're supposed to look at the lot of union and its lord and the lord of the dodecatemoria. So the lord of the lot of union for Nicole is Jupiter, but it's in the dodecatemoria of Gemini. So the lord of the dodecatemoria of her lot is Mercury. So we would take Jupiter and Mercury, and then we would look at her Fidaria, and whenever she gets to a planetary period that is either, ruled by the luminary or a benefic, and we get to a time where the sublord, the second planet, is either Mercury or Jupiter, it will be a time of felicity. A time of felicity is often a period where someone steps into a major relationship. It's usually marriages. And so, yeah, like, isn't that kind of cool? Like, this is a very, very advanced technique, but it's sort of like shows you the scope and the range of things you can do with the lot of union with timing. Like there's perfections, but then there's also, noticing like, oh wow, I've reached a Fidaria period where I'm in, a period of a luminary, and the Lord of the dodecatemoria of my lot of union, Mercury, is active now. I can expect maybe a relationship, something happening in the love life. And sure enough, that was the marriage. And because her sun had perfected, her sextile had perfected to Virgo, making Mercury a time lord, it was specifically 2006 that this happens, right? Because Mercury would have been a time lord, right? So yeah, it's like it matches up. It gives you like that specificity. It's like yeah. What else? What else? Um, Also, you could perfect a lot of unions itself in that year, like counting 4, right? It lands in Gemini. So again, Mercury again. So even more testimony for these like the more you see things like that pile on, the more sure you can be. It's like we perfect from the sun, the Mercury, but we also perfect a lot. It activates Mercury, also activates the sun, which is like, ruling Venus and the planet of love, and Jupiter, the planet of marriage. And, like this big public status change in the 10th, perhaps, Um, so yeah, we're always looking to sort of stack that testimony. Um, yeah. So Kidman's Lot of Erotic Desires. I don't know why I said it like that. Um, Kidman's Lot of Erotic Desires. So that's at 29 degrees of Capricorn. And so, again, let's look at the ruler. Like it's ruled by the Saturn. It's in the 3rd house. What could maybe we say about this? Like Capricorn is known as like a lusty sign in traditional texts. Capricorn is like a planet, a sign that's like into transgressing, maybe kind of doing things that are taboo, but also privacy, like Saturn, but specifically Capricorn. And she's kind of famously tight-lipped about her personal life in general, but also her sex life. Although one time she did say in an interview that she's like that she's into, quote, strange sexual fetish stuff. And I thought that, like, even the wording of that was like super, a lot of erotic desire in Capricorn ruled by Saturn to say, like, it's very vague, but it also lets you know that she's like doing things that might be, I don't know, seen as like taboo or sort of pushing boundaries in some sort of way. Um, but I also love that, like, yeah, there's still like the secrecy there of like you don't know exactly what. Um, Funny enough, Keith, being a musician, writes music about Nicole, and he has a song called Gemini about her. And I mean, you can like Google that song later, but I remember her saying that uh, at first she was like, "Oh my God, he wrote a song about like me," and she was like, she's like, I didn't want to censor him, but it did make me a little embarrassed at some of the lyrics. Um, and so yeah, someone who has like there are a lot of eros or erotic desires, and ruled by like, again, like a Saturn that's very private in a sign, in a Saturnian sign. It's like, yeah, that privacy thing. And she writes like that the part of the song that sort of embarrassed her kind of the most or made her blush, and she says this lovingly, is this like one part in the song where he talks about how she wakes him up in the middle of the night all the time, um, to sort of like, like make love. And so I don't know. I think that's funny too, because like the lot is like in the third house of like daily routines, and like the third house like being such a place of like routines, but frequent routines, right? Like we put the mail in the third. We put like, these things that happen with a certain amount of frequency in the third. And so um yeah, I kind of found that part kind of funny. Um but we kind of like don't know anymore really outside of that. But like I think that just speaks to, the Saturn rulership of this. She has this really interesting quote where she says, quote, "I've explored loss and love in terms of being in a grief-stricken place." So like, yeah, maybe there's, like Saturn has been a way for her maybe to explore these sort of Saturnian things in her life through partnership. Um, yeah. So I guess that's like what I would say about, maybe her lot of erotic desires. Yeah. What else? I think I sort of kind of finished. Yeah, wow. I don't even know what time it is. But I think that's like what I had to share today, and hopefully those examples were fascinating and cool. I'll just, say that like my greatest teacher is Dr. Ali Alomi. If you want to learn these techniques and get into the stuff, really his Patreon, Head on History, is the way to go. You can also read source texts like Valens and Paulus, Abu Mashar, Hellenistic Astrology by Chris Brennan. And then put my handles here where you can find me. So
Oscar,
yeah.
we probably still got about 20, half an hour, 20 minutes or half an hour, depending on how long people want to stick around. Would you like to take some questions?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, let's do
Put
that.
your questions in the chat and we'll read them off. See if we've got any.
Also, thank you everybody for being here. This is the first time I've ever given this talk, and I didn't time it beforehand. I actually was worried I wouldn't have time, so I might have rushed it and just, I don't know. I hope it was a good way to spend your night, and I'm just thankful for everyone's presence. And yeah, I hope to present this like, more and more, and it's the first time I'm talking about this, so yeah, I appreciate the grace.
Well, I know I enjoyed it. Thank you. I'm interested in the lots, and I've studied them a lot more superficially than you presented. So I'm really kind of inspired now to get more involved and more to get a little more curious about them from a more traditional point of view.
Yeah, they could be super illuminating, and affirming
Especially
and
in
validating.
synastry, especially in synastry.
Yeah,
Really what
yeah.
I've kind of looked at the most is how they fit into other people's charts.
Mhm.
That's pretty fascinating sometimes.
Absolutely. Um,
A question, can you use the lot of Eros in synastry? What orb do you use?
in synastry, I suppose you could. I mean, I would always keep the orbs sort of tight. I mean, orbs are kind of to me, it's a question of like volume on like a radio. So like, of course, if something is like within 3 degrees, that's like having your ear to like the speaker, and the more space from is like getting kind of like you're walking away from the speaker. So maybe that's less intense, you know? So like if a lot is at like 1 degree and then the planet's at like the end of the sign at 28, like you might be in the same room that like a radio is playing, but you're kind of at the end of the room. So it's sort of less loud, you know? So to me, that it's just a thing about like how turned on volume wise is this with orbs. I'm not too strict with them. To me, they just to kind of show like again like that sort of like intensity and sort of what that scale is, you know. But any contact is also, you know, really good. Cool.
Can you explain the Jupiter timing again with the lot of union?
Mm,
This person that didn't quite understand if it's when Jupiter projects to the lot or if it's when it transits the lot.
yes. So it could actually be either of them. So let's see. Let me go back to that slide. Yeah, so this has to do with a lot of union. And so this will be like when people get into relationships that are sort of important for them. And the timing technique is like Jupiter has to arrive at the lot or look at it from a place of power. So like power meaning like probably like, you know, like from an angle or something. So like, you know, for example, like Nicole Kidman's lot of unions in Pisces. So if she's living through a transit of Jupiter in Scorpio, that's a really nice trine. So like if we could say like at an abstract level, like, oh, this is a really nice period for her to have oaths with other people, unions with other people, because Jupiter in the sky transiting is making a nice trine to her Pisces lot of union. But also, this could also be uh, Jupiter arriving through perfection. So, like, you know, it could be that too. And then also, there's other things where, like, let's say her lot of union was like in Aries, so ruled by Mars. It could also be that Mars that year like arrives at the lot, or you know, we have all these other rules where like it could also be the sun, it could also be the moon that sort of perfects to that place where the lot is, which was the case for her, right? Like that her moon perfected to Pisces the year she got married, and so like right, the moon would have come to the lot and looked at it. So uh I hope that is clarifying. Yeah.
You said to count in zodiacal order. Do you also project in zodiacal order?
Yes. So absolutely. So like, you know, let's say yeah, like let's say we're starting here in Aries, like we're going around this way with Taurus next, Gemini next, Cancer, you know, it's kind of the order. Um yeah.
And do you think that couples have to have periods of felicity active at the same time?
This is a technique that was recently revived and translated from the Arabic, like literally this year. So by my teacher, Dr. Alomi. So we're still kind of like testing this out amongst ourselves. I will say for the examples today, of course, like the Nicole Kidman, I have access to an AA rated time, also with Jolie, but I don't have the chart of Keith. And so I would want to see if like, you know, if that chart ever becomes available, if it also lit up for him. But I would think maybe not necessarily, you know, like, and that might be just life too, you know, like you could be married to someone, it could be like, right, this period of felicity where it's like the most important relationship in your life, but like secretly to them, maybe you're less important, like, so I don't think it has to line up. I mean, I think it's beautiful if it lines up, but I think there's probably cases where one partner maybe is a little more in love than the other, and that's real. LOL. Thank you for that question. That's a cool question.
Let me see if we have any other ones. We have the lyrics to Keith Urban's song if you'd like to hear them. She'll wake you to make love in the middle of the night, and every breath that I take is brand new. I'm a man brought back to life. Castor and Pollux sent you to save me. I've returned to my Gemini. Is that
I
the
think
lyrics to the song?
yeah. And I remember like a lot of it's about like talking to her and her mind and being obsessed with her mind. I mean, like, one of the I didn't, this is another layer, but like, right, like there's an opposition to the lot of Eros for her from this Mercury in Cancer. And it's like, so like there might be things around like speech and stuff. And like, I'm sure within their relationship, like that sort of like chatty quality or that ability to sort of speak to each other is probably like erotic, like that's there too through like the Mercury context. So I think it's funny that he named it Gemini, and there's all this stuff about like conversations with her that are like inflaming his soul, yeah.
Let's see if we've got this one. What about when the signification is ruled by Mercury, like the dodecatemora? The dodecatemora. Sorry,
Could you be a little bit more specific, KPF, what you mean by that in the chat?
Is that KPF?
Yeah.
Yeah. Are you still with us?
Oh.
He's not answering.
Okay.
Let's see. Curious about how you think about the Lot of Eros plus union in 6, 8, 12 houses beyond just loss or difficulty.
That's a really great question. I look at a lot of charts that have like, for example, the lot of harmony in the 12th. And it tends to be, right, if the lot of harmony is about hobbies, in the 12th, right, like we have this like idea that like, sure, it's a house of like associations with jails, hospitals, these sort of exile experiences that are sort of maybe really intense. But a lot of my clients who have like the lot of harmony in the 12th, they love privacy and they love solo travel. Valens in the 2nd century says the 12th house is a travel house, and it's anywhere you go where you're a stranger. So again, like the element of the 12th is like long distance, short term. So like a lot of my clients who have like a lot of harmony there, they love to like, I don't know, go to the woods or sort of go to countries where they are an outsider or don't know the language. Like those things are fulfilling for them, the sort of like isolation element, the sort of retreat of the 12th house. The 12th house is also monasteries. So yeah, it's like this place of like contemplation and isolation, and that doesn't always have to be a bad thing depending on who you are, like I said earlier, like Nicole Kidman has her ruler Mars of her ascendant in the 12th. Like that cattle ranch in the middle of nowhere is actually probably really fulfilling for, I mean, she says it's really fulfilling for her to like go there and be sort of on her own. So, solitude isn't necessarily loneliness, and like some people do really well in those environments. So yeah, the lot of harmony in the 12 might speak to sort of like these hobbies of like, rock climbing and isolation, all these sort of things that feel recharging. And you asked specifically about the lot of Eros, right? Um, maybe being, or and also the lot of union being in these houses. So like, right, like the lot of union in the 12, like sometimes I've seen that be like maybe the partners are, having some difficulty, whether it's through substance, maybe they're differently abled, like, there's like the 12th and like these associations with like the, like the forgotten, or sort of like there might be some caretaking role that people sort of take for like the 12th house lover or something. Or again, it's that element of secrecy, it's like secret affairs, secret things like that. But also maybe it's meeting your partner abroad, or kind of having a partner that's like from a vastly sort of different culture. Or it's like sometimes like that lot of union in the 12th gets activated when you're like, I don't know, like in some foreign land, and like you meet someone at a pub, and like those are the conditions, right? Like you don't speak the language, you're not from there, you don't have any ties there, but like you're in this pub and you're a stranger and you meet somebody, and that's where you met in the 12th. um and so yeah, there's also like elements of privacy, with like these places that are more hidden in the chart, like the 12. um yeah, I don't want to go on and on. I hope that was helpful. Yeah.
And we had a question about a little more definition on what a dodecatemora is.
Um, yeah, could you give us your understanding of the 12 parts in relation to the lot? That's something, Doctor. Just first to finish further. Right. Do you see it as the root system and chart ruling connections, or do you? Yeah, I absolutely see it as like the 12 parts, and maybe that it's good to look at that slide. Because I kind of went past it. But like, right, like these are very sort of surgical cuts or sort of divisions of like the zodiac. And so like, right, like let's say my Venus is at 18 degrees of Aries, it falls in the dodecatemoria of Scorpio, right? Like these very sort of little zones. And yeah, to me the dodecatemoria show hidden connections. To me they're like tiny whispers, they're pointing to something. They're sort of the deepest parts of maybe the planets or the points. So like, for example, I think about Abu Mashar's delineations for the 12 parts or dodecatemoria of the ascendant. Like he writes like paragraphs about like what that person's life should entail, and like it's very specific, and using those translations for years, like you'd be really stunned, like and so yeah, they're supposed to be like very specific, they're supposed to sort of cut through and show these very like hidden aspects of the chart. Yeah, so that's how I understand them, absolutely. um
Do you see that as the root system of the chart, hidden connections? Do you have a different understanding of the logic of the 12 parts? Yeah, I think you just answered that.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
they're like heart chambers, right? Yeah.
my lot of union is in the 12th house, and usually people need to travel a lot or move to another country. I'm actually meeting someone again after not seeing them for 2 years because they live in another country.
Yeah, that's very 12. Yeah.
How do you determine which layers hold the most weight when you are combining them?
Oh, wonderful. Um, so it's testimony, right? Like uh Abu al-Hayat, for example, who's one of my favorite astrologers, he tells us like we can't say something to a client unless we see it 3 times or more. And so, I mean, astrology is really like they use these terms like stacking testimony. It's sort of like you're a lawyer, right? And it's like you want to go into the court case not just with one thing that maybe proves your person is innocent or didn't do it, but you kind of want like a hefty folder of like alibis, witnesses, So that's the great thing about like the chart too, is that like, and that's where a lot of the fun is for me, is like looking for repetitions, like, oh wow, like uh if we're perfecting from the ascendant, and it reaches Scorpio, it makes Mars a time lord. But then if you notice from the moon and the sun, it's also landing in Scorpio. That's 3 times Mars. So then you can be really sure that like something martial will appear for somebody. So really it's about like having an eye for noticing what repeats. And I think that comes with experience, but also, in the steps of preparing things, and like you start to know over time, like, oh yeah, like Jupiter's quickening the soul. Jupiter's a Time Lord from the Ascendant and the Sect-Light. Also, they're in a moon Jupiter for Daria. That's like, that's like Jupiter, Jupiter, Jupiter. So like, what's Jupiter mean for the person? That's going to come up. It's undeniable. You've seen it 4 or 5 times. So, yeah, I hope that's what you meant by that. Yeah. Oh, and the layers of the onion. Yeah. Cool.
I think that's all the questions that have come up in the
Yeah.
chat. Thank you. If anybody's interested, I put a note in there that the AOA would not be providing the video because that's your material. But you did tell us earlier, I believe, and let me make sure I have this right, that we will send the email, everybody's contact information from the sign up to you, and then you will put out access to the video for a limited amount of time if they should want to load it. Did I get that
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Okay.
I'll use the email list for everybody who signed up. So I know there's a lot of people who aren't here because of time zone differences. So I'll make sure I send everyone a mass email saying thank you and a bunch of other things. And I'll include a link to the recording there for your private viewing. So you'll have it. And you should expect that maybe within the week. So yeah,
Great.
thank you guys so much again for coming out.
All right, well, thank you very much. This was great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody everywhere around the world. My goodness, you have quite a following.
I think it's the Jupiter in the 9th house being the chart
Oh.
ruler. Yeah.
I have that too, and nobody follows me.
Oh, it's also maybe just lucky. Maybe I picked the date on the calendar where there's
Well,
like
you
a
have a lot
weekend.
of expertise in an area people are interested in. That helps.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you very, very much. And everybody else too for
Thank you all
coming.
for joining. And it was lovely to have you. And and I will put you on our AOA list so that you can be aware of other things that come up. And if you don't want to stay on it, just unsubscribe. Feelings
Please
are
do.
hurt. And I think we're done.
Thank you.
Anybody else
Bye,
have anything?
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to end the call for the night. Thank you.
Thank you.